Hello, everyone. How are we all today? So, I hope you've enjoyed learning about all the different options in paper one, and we are ready for tackling paper two, both for our SL and HL students. So, we are actually going to start with unit one, which is about population dynamics. So, we're going to look at the different populations, the how it changes, how it impacts different countries, what do they do, the policies regarding it, how to make the best use of a resource which is population for some countries, and how to mitigate if your dependency ratio is high, or just the scarcity of that resource. How would you handle that? So we're going to look at all of that, and it's really interesting because you can literally see people around you, populations. If you travel, you can see people reacting to the scarcity of population and overpopulation in different ways. So this is a really interesting topic. Like, you can connect it to really well, really easily. So let's get started now. So obviously we'll start with a small segment of understanding population and economic development pattern. So how are they both connected to each other, economic and population? So you, being a student of geography, know really well that population and economics, they really go well together. So a country with high population, if it does not have enough resources, will struggle in terms of economic development. Yeah, right, let's dive in. Okay, so just to give you some numbers, population distribution is not even, and you know that it's quite uneven in terms of how population is distributed throughout the world. 75% of the population, majority of the population, lives in within 1,000 kilometers of the sea. So you can literally gauge how important sea is, and how it was a big factor in determining where people would decide to settle themselves. 85% live in areas that are not very high in terms of altitude, just about 500 meters high. 85% live between latitude 68-degree north to 20-degree north. Now, obviously, we'll apply physical geography here, and we'll see how people are trying to avoid living in extreme environments, be it the tropics, be it the extreme paraglacial or polar environments. Then less than 10% of the people live in the southern hemisphere. It makes sense because there's more land area in the northern hemisphere, isn't it? So this is a beautiful application of physical and human geography. Let's look at this map, and you look at this map, look at the key, and try and tell yourself, how do these different economic development levels, how do they act in terms of population, overpopulation, underpopulation? So if you look at the world map here, you will see that the high income countries, the countries which have a high economic development, they are, North America, Eastern Europe, Australia, some of the Middle East countries. This is also the area, and if I were to make you guess, with high or low population density. So these are all the areas which do not have the problem of excess population. Now, all the middle, upper, lower, low income countries, as and when the color starts to get a bit more lighter, you would see that these are the countries which have a high population density in these areas, and the countries suffer because they not have the resources that they would need to be able to cope with the population that they have. Obviously, that is an asset as well, but we will look at how it acts as a resource, and sometimes how it can be a burden as well. The economic classification, there is a thing where we have divided countries into groups. We put them in different, like blocks, because they share some similar characteristics. So, for example, we used to have a classification of the first world and the second world and the third world countries, wherein the first world is equivalent of the most developed countries, the countries in Western Europe, the countries in North America or Oceania. On the other hand, second world countries are countries that were the communist countries that were, getting there, and the third world countries, basically all the countries which are less developed. A more advanced version of this has come up, because these three categories were actually not taking care of all the countries that we have, and there were some outliers. So another attempt has been made to put them into different categories, which is MEDCs, NICs, NEEs, and you must hear about them all the time, when we are studying geography. So MEDCs are, more economically developed countries. NEEs are newly emerging economies, so they're getting there. LICs are low income countries. So this is a new classification wherein you can put most of the countries in these three categories. Obviously, then there are smaller groups. So they have BRICS, right? BRICS to denote the countries that are getting more industrialized. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So they're all, because they share a similar characteristic, they're all very ambitious. They're all trying to, get into the bracket of more developed countries. So we've given them a term, BRICS, to understand this category, to keep an eye on them. Okay, they're getting there, right? Then there are Mint, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey, Civets. Similarly, there are so many groupings of these different countries together to show how they share similar patterns in terms of economic development. Then there is also centrally planned economies, such as, South Korea. Then there are economies that are run by oil. And then there are countries that are actually, they would take some more time to get to, like newly emerging economy status. So there are countries in Africa. Afghanistan is one country where they are still not developed, so we would call them as least developed countries. So these are all the classifications, just economic classification. Now this is a map of showing what I was telling you. Yeah. So main classifications in here is, obviously, if you want to look at the newly emerging economies, you look at the colors, where the purple, wherein, you can find countries that are trying to get the status of more economically developed countries. MEDCs are obviously, bright red. You can easily spot them. They are your Western Europe, North America, Australia, and then you have oil-rich countries. So you would see that pink color in the Middle East. Then there is a gap between LEDCs. So the least developed countries, obviously, you would see some of these African countries in that dark blue color. So this is an area that is actually struggling in terms of the economic development. So you would see, and if you see this line that is passing through, which is sort of giving it a north-south divide. So earlier we used to term the northern hemisphere as north is rich, south is poor. Obviously, there's more land in north, and there's less land in south. But irrespective of that, we're not quite using that term anymore, because of how the countries in the south, they are also, some of them are really doing really well. So we had to change the categories, right? So the north-south divide doesn't really stand anymore. Now, the population distribution and economic development at a national scale, we are going to use an example of China to understand how population plays a role in the development. Yeah. So if you look at China, it's a big country, but you'd be surprised to see that not all of it is as densely populated as we know China is. Yeah. So the eastern part of China, which is close to the ocean, has more population, is densely populated. On the other hand, the western part of China, which is more inland, has a difficult topography, has scarcity of water, is sparsely populated for these obvious reasons. Now, much of the country is desert-like. The Gobi Desert, obviously, you've heard of the desert's name, which is in China. The steep slope of Himalayas, the dry grasslands in the northwest, all of that gives it a characteristic of some areas would be dense, some areas would be not as dense, some areas would be really sparsely populated. So the reason behind all this is obviously physical geography, your topography, your climate, availability of water. All those things would decide where population would eventually then choose to settle and then grow. Right, like I said, so look at this map of China, and if you see the density of population, And I will need to draw attention to this map here. So look at this map density in 2020. You will is 2000, and then we will look at 2020. So in 2000, all this area you see, the red bits, all of this is the part of China that is highly populated. So this has only grown. Yeah. All this area has 0 to 250. Look at that bracket. Now, this area obviously remains like that in the 2020 projected map, but this area has become more red, which shows that there's been a growth of megacities. There's been growth in the urban areas that are situated on the eastern coast of China. And we can see on this map, obviously, here, this is more flat land. And in here, there's more plateau, Himalayas, the desert. So all this area, in terms of the availability of resources, it does not provide so much. So with this, we come to understanding urbanization. So urbanization is when more and more of these areas become highly populated. And we have seen that in case of China, more and more people trying to move to the other end of China, which has more employment opportunities, which has more resources, which has more links with the world. And this has created mega regions in China because of how their geography is placed. And it would increase the wealth, it would increase the number of millionaires, it would increase the number of megacities in the country, it would increase problems associated with overpopulation, pollution, crimes. It would also give some benefits like employment, healthcare, infrastructure, economy, all those things. So we are looking at the inequality that it would also lead to, isn't it? So inequality would be a problem. Some areas would be highly developed, some areas would not so much. So we are looking at the east, which becomes the core of China, and the west, which becomes the periphery, because that's where the resources are scarce. Now, this is leading to the internal migration in China. People from the periphery are trying to move to the core because of the employment opportunities that the laborers get, because of the better quality of life, because of education, because of quality of life, basically. The amount of wages that are earned are more. And so all of these factors will lead to an internal situation where people would like to be where the light is. Yeah. So the wages are about 40% higher in urban areas as compared to the rural areas, which makes the movement from rural areas to urban areas more prominent. The government obviously does not, any government would want to develop the area as a whole, make use of all its land, make use of all its territory. So they are trying to reduce this impact. They are trying to reduce this migration pattern by bringing development in the area that was not naturally fit to have big spurt of growth. So they are trying to bring more opportunities in the hilly desert, rural area of China towards the west. Now, if you look at this map and you look at the direction of arrows, that is telling you the volume of flow of people from rural to urban areas. And you can clearly see there's very less movement towards west. There's a lot of movement towards the southeast. So I hope that you really enjoyed this lesson, because I really enjoyed teaching it. Population has a big impact on the economic development of a country, and we will look at changing population, how the population changes, right? It changes. So what would be its impact? We look at how the demographics work, we look at population structures, we look at populations pyramids in the next few videos, and we'll actually get a lot more insight into what role does population play in an economic development of a country, how it can limit it, how it can also boost it. Yeah. So I will see you next. Bye bye.